Haggerstead, Adult Services Librarian at the Thomas Crane Public Library in Quincy, Mass. And on behalf of the library, I'm excited to introduce our February art exhibitor, Mario Forgione, and his collection on display, Pas Sol. Hi, Mario. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us what is Pas Sol and what does that title mean for this collection?
Yeah, Pas Sol loosely translates into like a solo dance, and it's something that I had taken a term that I've seen in ballet before. And the idea of Pas Sol was to do a continuation on a prior project of mine, Grandiose, and evolve it into something a little bit different, but focusing on individual floral arrangements in like a greater whole. So the idea that there's a single dancer in the sea of so much other things going on around it. I wanted to focus on simple subjects and make them stand out in like a larger background display.
And your previous exhibition was in 2019, Grandiose. Now, was that a study of rocks?
It was, yeah. So it was this project that I had started on with a large format film, photographing rocks and rock structures, but the key to it was something called forced perspective. I was really pushing to make these rocks that many of them were maybe like 1 square inch big and make them look like mountain ranges. So coming up very close and doing these macro studies and try and make them look much larger than what they really are.
And how different is it working with like geological subjects versus more maybe biological subjects like your nature study in Pas Sol? Or would you consider this a nature study at all?
I would definitely consider it a nature study. One of my inspirations for it is like Carl Blossfeld, who he did a lot of macro studies and did a lot of floral arrangement studies. I would consider this just almost as like a continuation of what Grandiose was, in a sense that it still focuses on the same techniques and the same output in many ways, but the subject matter has changed semi-significantly, right? With more floral arrangements and more nature versus just like strictly rock forms. I think I was trying to find something that I could go back to even within the same week and it would look completely different just because of how nature changes so drastically sometimes. And I think the big feature of it was really focusing on things that were kind of more small in the surrounding whole as for like the natural structures of everything.
And you began your photography career early on with influence from adventurous and creative parents. How much of that youthful exploration do you apply to your work?
I'd say a decent amount. My parents were very much like weekend warriors. We would go up camping spontaneously on a weekend or go on a road trip and get lost and find ourselves in Canada, which has happened more than once. So that kind of approach to just going out and photographing is something I kind of still carry with me today. I usually don't make much in terms of plans. I don't scout too much, and I just kind of go out on an idea. I go on a day that I'm free and kind of just let it fall to fate if I find something that day that fits what I'm looking for. And so far, knock on wood, it's worked out pretty well for me.
And not only did you study photography in school, but you studied art therapy in your college track. Are there any standards of the field that apply to photography that are separate from maybe other art forms? Or are there standards of inspiration that maybe the Quincy community in looking at your artwork could take as a form of art therapy from your collection?
Yeah, that's a good question and a difficult one to answer. But I think the idea behind Pas Sol is not only like the focusing on a single object, but the idea of like impermanence, and the idea of like really living in the moment. Because the way I approach Pas Sol and photographing these structures and these little floral arrangements tend to fall on like the cusps of seasons. So I'll go out and photograph usually at the beginning of spring and towards the end of spring and then into summer and fall and so on. Not so much winter, but it's a lot of these ideas of catching something at the right moment. And like the passerby, I think it's like, was it Henry Wadsworth Longfellow has that like the notion of the two ships that pass in the night. And so it's kind of going off that idea that like I'm trying to find these pieces that like at some point, like I said, even like the next week, they could be completely covered up by like the foliage around them. And you would have never known that this little like flower was like waiting there for you to see it. And then all of a sudden it goes away because it's covered up. So I think if anything, maybe not so much as an art therapy, but it teaches me a lot of patience. It continues to carry this idea of impermanence, but also really living in the moment of what is like surrounding you and where you are in the world. So that's usually what I try and think about and carry when I go out and photograph for this project.
And putting all of that thought into your process do you expect the same, to the audience to have the same experience as you when you take the photo? What do you hope your audience gets from viewing your work?
Yeah, it's a great question too. I don't even know too much because I haven't shown this work extensively yet. But I'm excited to see how it's taken. I think maybe if they're not accepting or not reacting in the same way, rather, of that idea of permanence or impermanence, they're seeing a kind of the detail on like a smaller level. Is I guess what I'm looking for people to recognize that there's like so much that goes into all these natural objects around us that if you even look at like a smaller level, it almost is infinite in its own way. The structure and the texture. I've always been like someone who really loves to photograph something that's textural. So I think really conveying, if anything, the idea that there is so much more to these little flowers, that there's just like these landscapes that you don't need to go photograph a large field or a large mountain range to get the aspect. You can go almost into your backyard sometimes and find something just as stunning.
And you said your previous exhibition with Grandiose was large format. Is this also a large format?
Yep. So I'm using large format film. Specifically, it's 4x5 sheet film. It's all black and white, and I process and develop everything myself as well, which is another part of, I guess, the process in itself of going out and getting the objects or getting the images and then coming back and doing the work to like create them.
And does that make a difference? You were talking about texture in your work. Does using this process and large format film, does that affect the overall result of texture?
I would definitely say so. I think working in film alone gives a different, sometimes ethereal feel, and that grain to the film, I think changes people's perspectives of how things look. And then when you're working on such a large format, where the negative is so large that you're capturing so much information, it tends to give a more detailed view of what you're looking at. Everything is sharper. Everything has more definition to it. You're capturing more information, so that's usually conveyed as well. So I think it just enhances what I'm trying to put forth in this project by shooting on large format film.
Now, in addition to viewing it here, where else can we see your work?
That's great. So I have my website, marioforgione.com. I am usually on Instagram, which is Mario Forgione, and then like a little underscore, but I'm currently off of it for a little bit. And hopefully you can see my work at some other galleries I'll be reaching out to in the near future.
And in addition to this project, and we know you had a previous project, what can we expect to see from you in the future? Do you have any other new projects lined up, or new journeys in your art?
Yeah. So one of the biggest interests in my putting work out into the world and the way I like to procure my projects, I like to do longitudinal studies. So Grandiose was like a culmination of about 2.5 years of work. Pas Sol has just hit its like 1.5 year mark. And I plan to carry that for about 5 to 7 years. So the next iteration of this will just be the continuation of me going out to different parts. And right now it's predominantly New England, and I'd like to carry this to different parts of the world. So Pas Sol will kind of live in hopefully different realms based on like the different locations I travel. Beyond that, I'm not too sure. We'll see. Always shooting landscape and photographing nature. So I'm sure inspiration will pop up. At some point, I'll start a new project.
We look forward to it. And one more question for you. What are you currently reading, or what would you recommend to anyone viewing a great read?
That's such a good question. I just finished Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. That was a phenomenal book. It was very philosophical, very teacher-student driven, that tackles some of the idiosyncrasies and different aspects of life as we currently live it in our modern age. And I just picked up Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, which I'm a little bit late to the game on that one, but I would so far recommend it after the few chapters I've got into it.
Well, we thank you so much for your recommendation and for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we encourage you all to visit the main library at 40 Washington Street in Quincy to see Pa Soul on display on floor 1. See you soon.
I'm so excited to have Kyle Carey here, who is going to be performing as part of our concerts at the Crane series on Sunday, February 13th at 3 p.m. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
I know, and we're so excited to have you perform. I just wanted to start out, Kyle, by asking you describe your musical style as Gaelic Americana. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned, well, I've always loved Celtic music. Probably when I was in college, I became like the most interested in it. And of course, I'm American. So I kind of felt like I wanted to be able to play music that had elements of like my Celtic heritage in it, because my ancestry is like Irish and Scottish, as well as some other things too. I'm kind of like a mutt like most Americans, but so after college, I started to learn Scottish Gaelic, ended up on the Isle of Skye, where I learned it fluently. And that was really important to me, because I felt like if I wanted to call myself a Celtic artist or a Gaelic singer, I really needed to be able to speak the language fluently. So that ended up happening. And when I was going to record my first album, I had been writing songs like all through college, which were very much more kind of like Americana sounding, like using American folklore. And I thought, this is kind of the perfect way to describe what I do, because I'm American, and that's really my heritage, but my ancestry is Celtic, Scottish, and Irish particularly. So I can kind of meld what is sort of just like in my DNA together into a sort of sound. And that's what I tried to do. And that's sort of what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years. I really, I feel like, I found this niche, and I'm just kind of trying to stay sort of faithful to that. And it's been quite the adventure, I have to say.
Wow. And actually just touching on that further, because so you first studied the Gaelic language in Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. Is that right?
Yep.
And so going back even further, I mean, what first drew you to sort of traditional Gaelic music and language? Because it's very specific, and it's like was there something in your childhood, or like when did you first hear it?
Yeah, you're right. It is very specific. I think, my parents love folk music, and there's so much that goes under that umbrella, but certainly like there was Celtic music in our household. And then I would say when I was in college, I went to Ireland for the first time for like a 2-week trip, and I heard Irish being spoken. And I think before that, I barely knew that there was even a language. And I thought that's so amazing. And that's probably the language my ancestors spoke. And so I think that's really what encouraged me to start learning. And I actually started with Irish, and then I ended up going with Gaelic in the end, kind of just because there's more of a learning structure for learning Scottish Gaelic. With Irish, you're kind of on your own, and people do it for sure. But Gaelic's nice because there's a place you can go to where you specifically are immersed in the language. And, I did that program for a year. And to me, like the languages are so closely related that you'd be hard pressed to say that they're two separate languages. I mean, Scottish Gaelic evolved from Irish, and they're still so similar. It's really, I can understand most Irish. And actually, if I speak Scottish Gaelic to an Irish speaker, they usually know what I'm saying, and they usually respond to me. So they're so closely linked. It didn't really feel strange for me to leave Irish to go to Scottish Gaelic, because it kind of just felt like I was just going to a different dialect, really.
Yeah, I love that. And you actually, so you mentioned your family, and I know your father is a writer. So you, I mean, you come from a creative background. Do you think that's influenced you as a musician?
Yeah, definitely. He's not, I mean, he plays guitar, but he's not really, I wouldn't say music is his strong point, but his writing is wonderful. And he exposed me to really good writing as a very young child. So I think that that really influenced me in my songwriting. And I love all kinds of writing. I love writing prose, and I've written some poetry. And so, yeah, I think definitely they, and he in particular, is a big part of the reason why I turned out to be a writer, a songwriter, for sure. Yeah.
I love that. Now this is a little bit more of a pessimistic question, but maybe not. So how has COVID changed how you find yourself working and creating music?
Oh, yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
You probably get the same answer every
yeah,
time.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's been yeah, it's been pretty tough. So when COVID first hit, I had 3 really big tours scheduled. Like I was supposed to go to like Colorado, Montana, and then I was also slated to go to like sort of like Wisconsin, that part of the country, and then I was actually supposed to go to the UK, and then I was going to come home, and I had some New England shows, and all of them just got canceled. And I had a feeling, I mean, a lot of musicians were kind of rescheduling like 3 months later.
Mhm.
And I just was like, I don't think this is going to be a matter of a couple months. So I just didn't reschedule anything because I was like, no, I'm not letting this happen again. That was traumatizing. And, and then of course, here we are like 2 years later, and we're still kind of in the thick of it. So I did a couple online shows. I started a Patreon, and luckily I do teach on Skype Scottish Gaelic. So I have some private students. So I had that going too. But we also had a lot of other things going on in our lives. Like I'm actually currently pregnant. And so that took
Congrats.
2 years. Thank you, to make it happen. We had to get IVF, and like the whole like just infertility thing took up a lot of life and time. So it was like, even though COVID was happening, I had this other thing going on too that would have prevented me from really traveling, because I just never knew when I needed to be at the clinic and this and that. So so it was all in all, like it was a kind of just a very emotionally charged 2 years, but
for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So on a happier note anyway, so you collaborate regularly with other musicians, I know, who often come from a lot of different genres. So how do you think that's influenced the creation of your original material?
I think quite a bit. So so my first really, I would say like it's my producers that kind of will put their touches on my albums. My first album had an Irish producer, and I felt like that came through quite clearly in the recording, and most of the other musicians on it were Irish. And then my second album, he's Irish American, but we recorded it in Scotland, and we brought a lot of Scottish musicians on board. And again, I feel like that changed the sound a little more. And then my most recent one was actually recorded in Louisiana, and that producer has a lot of background in Cajun music. So that was a really cool new element to bring in. And the main guitarist on that album is a Cajun guitarist. So that changed things a little bit more, which was really neat. So I kind of, for the next album, I have to figure out a new twist, but
something different. Yeah, different influences.
Right. Yeah. So it's president, so I have to every time, but it's good. It's fun. It keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And I mean, we're so excited. So again, just for everybody at home, Kyle's going to be performing here at the Thomas Crane Public Library on Sunday, February 13th at 3 p.m. in the Richardson Building. I'm so excited. I'll definitely be in the front row. And thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Christine. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
with a northern speech and air. She dyed her skirts a harlot's red, more dandelion leaves in her hair. They all turned to watch her pass with her Maggie surreal sachet. When she danced in the August sun in the cornfields near Potter's Bay. Say you're weary, say you've been warned of love from the cold northern plain. Keep watch of your husbands, beware of the passion of Nora King. She loved with the strength of a summer storm, led many a true heart astray, cried as fierce as the wind in the eaves when the love that she snatched stole away. They called her brazen, they called her slut, put poison wood vines at her gate. She tied 'em up with a ribbon so red, made wreaths of their venom and their hate. Say you're weary, say you've been warned of love from the cold northern plain. Keep watch of your husbands, beware of the passion of Nora King. When she was ready to get up and go, not one wished her well on her way. Passing by in the dead of the night, leaving frost on the wheat fields and hay. I hear she's up by Connors Pass, raising hell and breaking hearts. When she gets down to Blowing Rock, Lord, she'll tear this town apart. Say you're weary, say you've been warned of love from the cold northern plain. Keep watch of your husbands, beware of the passion of Nora King. Say you're weary, say you've been warned of love from the cold northern plain. Keep watch of your husbands, beware of the passion of Nora King.
Hi, my name is Kelly and I'm a staff member at the Thomas Crane Public Library. Today I will be reviewing a book called Love and Color, Mythical Tales from Around the World, Retold. It's a debut collection of short stories written by Bolu Babalola, a British-Nigerian writer. In these stories, Babalola reimagines 13 myths and folk tales into modern stories. She focuses on myths from different cultures with an emphasis on West African tales. Each story revolves around love in its various forms. In fact, Babalola isn't afraid to offer a bold and fresh update on the original tale. This often involves dismantling outdated notions of female roles that are evident in the original tale. The result is a collection of vibrant, empowering stories that show diverse female characters with agency, and they reflect the social changes evident in today's society. It's also nice to come across some familiar characters and others that I had never heard of before. What I look forward to most is seeing how Babalola uses her creativity to retell each story. She sometimes goes as far as to reimagine the tales in a contemporary setting. Despite these changes, she maintains the spirit of the original story. And these retellings show how the lessons and themes of the myths and folktales are very much relevant today. Unsurprisingly, given the short story format, a lot of action happens in very little time. As someone who is not as familiar with West African mythology, I was pleasantly surprised to discover new tales and characters. I recommend taking the time to become familiar with the original tale before reading Babalola's version, especially if it's one you've never heard before. Given that many myths and tales evolve over time, this reimagining is like a continuation of that evolution. Overall, I highly recommend Love and Color. This book showcases Babalola's creativity and genius. The 13 individual stories revolve around the concept of love, but the collection is also like a love letter to the myths and folk tales themselves. She turns traditional love stories into inspiring modern tales, and in doing so helps to introduce a new generation of readers to these timeless tales. So pick up your copy of Love and Color by Bolu Babalola today. Visit thomascranelibrary.org to request a physical copy, or visit Overdrive to access it in ebook or audiobook formats. And thanks for watching.